Je vous propose de...
Would you please like to move forward and take your places, please? There's a lot of seats at the front of the room, on the right and on the left.
Alors, je vous souhaite la bienvenue.
I'd like to welcome you to Mortefontaine Castle.
Nous allons une cérémonie qui va...
We're going to have a ceremony which will take about 2 hours with different speakers.
Le déroulé est assez simple.
It's a very simple
Je vais céder
order.
la parole
I'm going to very quickly ask David Kiskowski to speak. He's the son of Simon Kiskowski, who is part of the board,
La société
or
détient le château. Voilà.
which is in control of this castle.
Hi everyone. I'll be giving the talk in English for our
Bonjour, je vais parler en
American friends,
anglais
of course.
pour nos amis américains, bien sûr.
So yeah, I'm David Kiskowski, so I'm
Donc,
Simon's
je suis
son.
David
I just want to start by saying what a pleasure, what an honor to have all of you here today.
Ça me fait très plaisir de vous voir tous
Yeah, I hope
ici
to
aujourd'hui.
get to speak to as many of you as possible.
J'espère pouvoir
And,
parler à autant de
yeah,
gens que
hope
possible parmi vous.
You'll have a great
Et
time here.
j'espère que vous êtes bien.
I'll be giving a short talk
Je vais
about
parler courtement
sort of the history of
de
this
l'histoire
place,
de cet endroit.
what its historical significance is, and why it makes it such a
Pourquoi tous ces
ideal place for us to be having this meeting today. So this castle has such deep history, and I'll be trying to obviously go through the main points. It was constructed at the beginning of the 17th century, but obviously it's mainly famous for what happened in the early 1800s, where it hosted many major diplomatic and political events hosted by Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother. Obviously, throughout time, it's seen a lot of transformations, but through this transformation, there's always been very extraordinary and impactful people that have been hosts here. Examples being Gérard de Nerval, the street is actually named after him, and the painter Corot, for those who are more into the arts. Of course, being so close to Chantilly and Ermenonville, which hosted the princes of Condé, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Mortefontaine was always going to have such a deep history. But so to go all the way at the start, in the Middle Ages, where the castle of Montmélian, which was this very large, almost 2,000-acre land, had several successive owners. It started with Philippe Auguste, the Lords of Senlis, going to the Abbey of Saint-Denis. Finally, the fief was in the hands of the families of Pléy, de Rebourg, and finally the Hotman. Them being the ones that basically took from the initial foundation of this castle and rebuilt into sort of the first real habitable castle, where under the reign of Louis XIV, actually the new owner became Jacques Le Coigneux, who was the son of the then president of the Paris Parliament, and became so Mortefontaine, where he acquired Mortefontaine in 1655. That's where he basically put the first arrangements, the chapel, the billard room, and basically some of the rooms in here. In the following century, so Louis Le Pelletier was the new owner, and he hired the architect Michel Duval, who completely transformed both the interior with the installation of the grand staircase, an auditorium, but also and mainly the gardens. So the gardens were a marvel for anyone at the time that came to visit, with notable painters Hubert Robert, Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun, and the architect Brognac, who were on record to saying this was a big inspiration for their work. A quote by Buffon say that the situation of having a large park, the river, the rock, a cooler, an orangerie, temple, a fountain, and a pavilion was described as the situation will call the sweetest chords on the lyre of future poets. I couldn't have put it better myself. So other notable guests before 1789 were people such as the King of Sweden, Gustav III, the Abbot de Lille, Dupont de Nemours, and the sulphurous Mesmer and Cogliostro. Obviously, the revolution took its toll on the castle. It was sold in 1790. The estate and the furniture were completely scattered. The then new owner, Joseph Duret, actually added 30 rooms and actually planted quite a lot of different species of trees in the park. But then the main sort of event occurred in 1798, where the castle was then bought up by Joseph Bonaparte, the brother of General Bonaparte, and he brought everything back together as a whole. Joseph Bonaparte then installed here with his family, most notably of which were his wife Julie Clary and his sister-in-law Désirée. Of course, sister-in-law, also former fiancée of his brother, and newly remarried to Marshal Bernadotte, the future King of Sweden.
Qui serait le roi de Suède par la suite.
So at the end of the directory is really where this place became kind of a hub for the political elite. There were a lot of evenings and gatherings here. Again, it was close to Paris, but not too close, so there would be prying eyes, so there can be deep conversations going on. There's a record of people such as Lucien Bonaparte, Talleyrand, Roderer, Regnault de Saint-Jean d'Angély, all future ministers of the consular or the imperial regimes meeting here. So, other than that, it was actually in this setting where the marriage of General Murat occurred with Caroline, who was the sister of the first consul, soon to ascend to the throne of Naples in 1800. That same year, and of course very representative to what we're doing here, was signed the Convention of Mortefontaine, which ratified the alliance between France and America. Of course, this was done in the presence of the plenipotentiaries Davy, Ellsworth, and Murray. Of course, in the presence of Napoleon Bonaparte himself, Lafayette, and then also the main French dignitaries of the time. As he was here, Joseph Bonaparte used his influence to expand the castles, make transformations. This place was becoming also a center for some of his diplomatic events. He signed here the peace preliminaries with Austria, which before signing the Lunéville, which actually also, this is when Pauline, who was then Napoleon's favorite sister, married Prince Camille Borghese, which was actually her second, for the second time in 1803. So as Joseph himself put it, life in Mortefontaine is one of innocence and peace. So to give you a bit of context behind that, so 1802, his second daughter Charlotte is born. And life here is, I mean, as you can see him put it, just what you would expect from these types of people at the time. A real court developed here. People go on long walks and then they have philosophical discussions. They go home, they play literary games. And of course, always people of grandeur frequenting this place, notably Madame de Staël, Bernardin de Saint-Pierre, or Stendhal. Napoleon himself was put on record as saying that he came here quite often to resource himself. So he relied on coming here quite often well accompanied as well by the likes of the miniaturist Isabey, the painter Bidot, or the portraitist Gérard, who all used this place as an inspiration for their future works. Francesco and Pietro Piranesi actually also drew every single corner of this place. And so what the typical day out here for the emperor would be to go out in the forest and hunt during the day, and then come back and in the evenings either attend to some reading or and watch some plays. So at the beginning of the 19th century, the castle is as it is today. So the architect Jacques Sellerier's work actually perfected completely the legacy which was of the ancient regime. So you've seen as you were walking through the vestibule and the antechamber, followed by another dining room, the BR room, the large lounge, and of course the wonderful gardens. On the ground, oak floors and the Hungarian point in the market street give way to marble in the bathrooms. And of course the park. Yeah, the park. After Waterloo, obviously another turning point, and the passage of the Prussian troops, the castle was largely destroyed. So, despite obviously the protection of some of the sort of core figures and core sort of emblematic facade, it took a large toll. Obviously, Julie Clary could no longer be the owner of the estate, as she was under a state of exile, and the ownership was passed to her brother, Nicolas, in 1816. Succeeding him was Catherine Honorine Blette of Villeneuve, who was also born a Clary, who ended up renting the castle to Baron Schickler. And so at that time, the festivities continued, as they had done in the past, where hunting was still ongoing, a lot of horse riding, they had built stables. Following that, the Prince of Condé, of course of the region, father of Duke d'Enghien, acquired the place, and then after his death, Baroness Fischer inherited it. Under the July monarchy, again, it's recorded that she would visit Mortefontaine often, and that is around the time when Gérard de Nerval would come around and walk throughout the park. Again, you can actually see through some of his works, in Sylvie, for example, he would evoke that this place was a huge inspiration for him. The same goes for the painter Corot, who actually exposes in 1863 his Souvenir de Mortefontaine, which actually got noticed by Napoleon III, is now currently in the Louvre, and also his work Batelier de Mortefontaine is now preserved in New York. Finally, so after Sophie Tanaron, wife Corbin, her two daughters, some baroness and countess, continued to care for the castle, trying to maintain it properly somehow, despite having obviously less resources as their predecessors. The Great War happened. There was a lot of infighting between the villages of the region, and 10 years after the war ended, Louis René, who was Count of Gramont, basically became the new owner of the estate. Despite the Second World War, he managed to pass it on to a congregation of Dominicans, who then set up an oratory, a boarding school for girls. And after many other iterations and new sort of, let's say, use cases for the castle, such as even a hotel, in 2004, the castle, the two pavilions and the park were registered as historical monuments. And here we are today. That's it. Thank you for your time.
Je vais laisser la parole.
I'm now going to ask Vincent Egalé to speak, who's going to talk for about 45 minutes on the Napoleonic period, and then 15 minutes questions and answers. Vincent Egalé is going to introduce himself.
Bien. Mesdames et messieurs, bonsoir.
Good evening. Thank you to the City Hall of Mortefontaine for welcoming me today and asking me to speak about the Bonaparte family for a short while. He took me a bit by surprise because I found out about this just a few days ago, but I'd like to reassure you because I do know quite a lot about this subject, because it's a subject of it was my thesis subject, and so I really know these places. And then I did a PhD in the Sorbonne, more generally on the Bonaparte family and the revolutionary heritage. So I also have to introduce myself, but there is a link with this ceremony. I'm the director of the Versailles Library, which is situated in the former Ministry of Navy Ministry and Louis XV Museum, where the Independence Treaty was negotiated in 1783. And we're just a little historical milestone in this big, wider history which was going on at the time. And so in some way, the loop is closed. And I'm very happy to speak both as the director of the library, which is linked to the United States, on the occasion of this signing of this twinning agreement between Bordentown and Mortefontaine. I'd just like to use three main words. I'm going to just quote 3 words from Lucien Bonaparte to begin. The 3 words which he gave as words of advice to all his officers when he became Home Minister at the end of 1799. Briefness, precision and distinction. Don't know whether you can say briefness. This is a really good way of summing up what administration should be like. I don't know whether we can say that today, but the fact that he said it shows that there was some clarification and simplification needed in the administration of the day, of his time. Administration after the revolutionary period. And Lucien Bonaparte, his attitude is really expressed in these 3 words: being brief, precise, and distinct. Be brief, precise, and distinct. I'm going to try and be like him, although historians don't really understand how to be brief, to be really honest. Being brief and to the point, I'm going to just present the Bonapartes briefly and give you a few precise details and maybe a few distinctions about them. Brief, precise, distinct. So as David just before me was reminding you, this castle has an amazing history, thanks to what Joseph Bonaparte contributed to it, and also the policy which he carried out under the orders of his brother, and also thanks to the people that he invited, and with famous people like Germain de Staël, the Duke of Montmorency of the time, Pierre-Louis d'Entre, Stanislas de Girardin, among the people who came often here. And there's a reason why Joseph looked so hard and liked this place, wanted to acquire this place, because it's very close to Ermenonville, and Ermenonville was the place where Jean-Jacques Rousseau is buried. And in fact, getting closer to Ermenonville per Joseph Bonaparte meant, in some way, showing his loyalty, his philosophic loyalty to the person who had inspired the Bonapartes, meaning him and their brothers, throughout their youth, right up to the French Revolution. And the young Bonapartes read a lot of Rousseau, Voltaire, Bernardin de Saint-Pierre, and other writers in this same philosophical naturalist vein, close to this feeling of nature. And if the Bonapartes are still fascinating for us 200 years afterwards, and if we still find it complicated to explain their journey, it's because themselves tried to understand their place in the world. What was their place in nature, and why what was happening had brought about such this great event, which was the French Revolution, and also the Napoleon Bonaparte's career, which were great events. So Joseph Bonaparte came to Mortefontaine. It's like a symbol of their closeness to the philosophical thought of the Enlightenment, and this desire to assume and take on board this heritage in the perspective of a new century which was opening up, meaning the 19th century. And so these Bonapartes didn't just come from nowhere, but they had this ability to fascinate us a long time afterwards. They're not French. That's the first thing we should note. And because of their brilliant careers, these are two of the reasons why we're fascinated by them. And the Bonaparte clan was a small clan, unlike other big Corsican families. They were the descendants of a family originally from Salzano, close to Liguria, in Italy. In the 16th century, this family had emigrated to Corsica to become, later on, soldiers and business people. And this family would settle eventually in Ajaccio. And Ajaccio at the time was a small town, just a small port, Préside, as we say. There was a kind of marginal territory, and that's why the Bonapartes often stayed on the margins all throughout their history, because they reflect their origins, their geographical origins. And from this Préside, they're kind of slightly cut off from the rest of Corsican, because they look out to sea more. And the relationships which could exist with Italy, because most of the Bonapartes studied in Italy at the time, and their father, Charles Bonaparte, Carlo Maria de Bonaparte, was also subject to this rule. He studied in Rome and in Pisa. In Pisa, Joseph Bonaparte was also there on a journey to look for his family roots between 1785 and 1788, and he was very interested in this question during this period. And the Bonapartes were not really linked to the big Corsican family clans. They had a few links with the Cornano, for example, and other smaller families, the Pietrasanta, Ramolino, because these were the clans that Laetitia came from, Madame Mother, as Napoleon said, Napoleon's mother. And in this respect, they don't hesitate to call on foreigners or people from outside to continue to increase their career and increase their relationships. And that's how a Swiss captain, François Fesch, was able to marry, a second marriage, Laetitia's mother, Angela Romolino. And this brought in a foreigner into this little microcosm of Corsican family. And the Bonapartes were already themselves descendants from people who had emigrated to Ajaccio. And as we can see, this family was open on the world, to the world, but didn't have very much social impact. Although you do find a few Bonapartes sometimes in the minutes of different meetings, administrative meetings in Ajaccio. They're very peaceful, a peaceful family living off their land. And then a very important character comes on the scene, Pasquale Paoli. And Paoli, between 1750 and 1768, was going to try and create a republic in Corsica, which would be independent from the Genoan Republic, because often we say, and it's not right, that the Bonapartes were from Genoa, but it's not true. They're not Genoese. The fact that the Isle of Corsica was a dependency of Genoa doesn't make them Genoese, because Genoa was kind of an oligarchy, and Corsica was a dependency, almost a colony of this Genoese state. Then a big revolution began from 1729 onwards, and this was the moment when this doctrine of the people, the right of the peoples to determine their own future, starts to impose itself, and the Corsicans start to think about having an independent state for themselves. Giacinto Paoli, the father of Paoli, who took up this idea, and then Pasquale followed in his footsteps. And Pasquale in 1760-63 called on young, qualified Corsicans coming back from France, from their schools, to become part of his administration, write speeches, and make Corsica known outside the island. And amongst these young people, there was a young Charles Bonaparte. And that was how the Bonapartes finally became an important element in the creation of a new state, right until the real politique took over, and the French who were allies of Genoa decided to take over Corsica and make and impose that Corsica be attached to France. But Corsica was only. We've often said that Napoleon and Joseph. There's a lot of confusion to try and make Napoleon be born as a French person. But in fact, only in 1789 was Corsica an integral part of France. And so, in fact, the Corsicans were subjects of the king with a separate status with an intendant. Charles Bonaparte was not able to follow Paoli in his exile in London, so he stayed in Corsica, and it was easy for him to join the ranks of the new master, which is the intendant of the French king and the military governor, Monsieur de Marbeuf, and to put his network and his capacities, make them available for the French to use. And that's why he sent his sons, his three first sons, Joseph, Napoleon, and Lucien, to mainland France, so that they can pursue their studies not in Italy but in France, where they could learn how to perfect their French and also learn the culture, the French culture. There's all kinds of legends, very well-known legends about Napoleon. When he arrived in Berlin at the school, everyone mocked his accent and the fact that he was a small Corsican noble, only recently recognized as a noble, and it kind of stood out amongst all these sons of the great families of the kingdom. And finally, this feeling of being somewhere apart on the margins, we're going to forge his character and make him ready to fight. The same thing happened to Joseph as well as Napoleon, even though sometimes between the two brothers there's a bit of tension, particularly in the fact that both of them both wanted the place of the elder brother in the family context. Napoleon didn't really accept to be second after his older brother, who is only 1 year older than him. And Napoleon would take advantage of one of Joseph's moods, who in 1784, Joseph refused to an ecclesiastical career, religious career, and this refusal seemed to take away his right being the older brother, and it was as if he'd made the family ashamed by refusing his parents' wish. And Charles accepted to follow in his footsteps and become a law, and he promised not to overshadow Napoleon, Napoleon was supposed to have a military career. And so Napoleon's problem as a false, fake younger brother started at this time. And in 1785, Charles died in Montpellier. And this was the end of all Charles' dreams, particularly for the career of all his children. He'd had a lot of children with Laetitia. The eldest was Joseph, then Napoleon, born on the 15th of August, 1769, then Elisa, then Lucien, and then Louis, then two girls, Pauline and Caroline, and then finally a little boy. And 1784, Jérôme. And those are just the children who've survived for a few years, because there were lots of other children that didn't survive. And this family was kind of cut into two, because on the one side there was Napoleon, Joseph, Elisa, and Lucien, who were able to go to France into the educational institutions where their fathers had placed them, and then the others who stayed in Corsica, whose education would not be so thorough, and then the youngest, who would be sometimes difficult to find their place in the family system. From 1785 to 89, the Bonaparte family went through crisis after crisis. Laetitia was very depressed because her husband died, and her half-brother, Joseph Fesch, who would take control and become the family head, waiting for Napoleon to come back from France so that he could look after the family's affairs. And as you could see, everything is all focused on Corsica. Nothing has been raised about a career in France. First of all, their priority is to save the family enterprise in Corsica. And then 1789 happened, and it was a surprise for the Bonapartes, a good surprise, because even though they had been recognized as nobles, their family situation being what it was, the end of the privileges opened them up a lot more interesting perspectives than what they had up to the point. For example, the military perspectives for Napoleon, who thought that maybe he wouldn't just be a subaltern in the army, and political perspectives for Joseph, who thought maybe he might be president of the new departmental council in Corsica, this type of a dream, or maybe even a member of parliament, so that he could. But they still found out like they were hitting up against the ceiling, because other Corsican families could be more in a stronger position to assume these positions.
However, there were members of the left wing, and they joined the Jacobin movement. The opposite party in Corsica were already quite involved, and Paoli, who has just come back from the exile from London in 1790, accepted to meet the Bonaparte sons, but was a bit careful. He wasn't quite sure about the behavior of the father during the French conquest. So to some extent, the refusal of Paoli to include the Bonaparte sons in the political system, which led to another attempt of independence, actually was a good opportunity for Napoleon and the brothers. They had to leave the island in 93 to go to mainland France, where they really started to join the Republican Party or camp, and they supported France during the Toulon siege. So in some way, it is through these events that they became completely French, and they paid the price of the exile, Corsican exile, and they became fully French citizens. And the Convention actually mentioned them as an example for their role and their patriotism in a context that was the context of civil war, a civil war which became even more terrible in some areas of Corsica, which was very violent, just like the one in Vendée, for example. So in that respect, they became important players in an apparatus which was trying to go beyond the French borders, especially as part of the conquest of new territories under the French banner. And of course, Italy, Napoleon, since 93-94, from 93-94, mentioned that Italy was not well exploited, and if people would trust him and give him an army, he would know how to reverse the trend, because things were not going that well in Germany at the time and in Belgium. And that's exactly what will happen as of 96, when he became the commander-in-chief of the Italian army. And he included his family in all of the benefits and all the progressions that he was making. So we find him again as a diplomat for the army. We find him again. We've also find another uncle, the Uncle Fesch. He was, in a way, the savior of the family in 85. He had become a priest by now, but he left the order after 93, and he became a military administrator. We also find again Lucien, the other brother, who was the most radical of all. He was actually rebaptized Brutus Bonaparte, which was not really very welcomed. And then all the other brothers and sisters who also always came along, who needed to be taken care of, and the education was still needed. They were still too young and did not quite understand what was going on during these years. So this family needed some financial means, which they found in Italy, and they became richer in Italy. With the royal lots, and by marrying also, especially Joseph, who married the daughter of a rich merchant from Marseille, Julie Cléry. And we know that Napoleon actually dated the sister of Julie, Désirée, for some time. The Clary family were not too keen on having two Bonaparte sons in the same family. They did not have such a good reputation, so the first proposal was declined. But even back then, they were looking for places to settle down, like chateaux, castles, in order to develop a political network. And in that way, the Bonaparte family was always trying to remain within the margins. And they took great part in the success of the Republican army in Italy. But regarding the French government, things were not going so well with the Directoire, especially because Napoleon soon understood that the political regime did not really match what he was hoping for, especially the fact that it was a regime which put back the censitaire vote, whereas Bonaparte preferred universal vote. So he had Lucien and Joseph elected at the Assembly of the 500, and thanks to their influence, they made a kind of a prototype of the Bonaparte Party, even though there was no such political party at the time. But this party started to develop along the way through political activities and news. At times they would turn to the Jacobins, other times to the Royalists, etc., depending on the news and depending on their own interests as well. Very carefully, Napoleon went to Egypt in 98 and was hoping that his brothers back home would continue to carry his project, the project of a family ascension that would give them good positions for which they were hoping. And in 89, he comes back from Egypt, quite surprisingly. No one was expecting him. And very quickly, in a very short time, he started implementing a whole structure, the necessary structure for a change of regime, an immediate change of regime. And he insisted on his hostility to the current regime, the fact that the regime was not popular at the time. And he used that. He used the fact that he was not popular to present himself as a man of providence. Of course, we should make a distinction and explain this hostility. The directory was never actually hostile to Napoleon. They even gave him the commandment of the army and various responsibilities. And we find Lucien and Joseph again at the head of a number of cases, but it was time just to move on to something else. And the Bonaparte really managed to turn things around and to have people with them who were very important people at the beginning of the revolution, who managed to escape the terror and who were dreaming of coming back to the origin of the revolution with the parliamentary regime that would be moderate, that would be peaceful, or simply to close this cycle of revolutions. In 1798, we believed at the time, people believed that the Jacobins, the most radical, were about to take power again and to win the elections. And a large part of the administrations and political elites did not want this to happen because it meant continuing the war and continuing a kind of a disorder within, or lack of order within the country, and a kind of a civil war. After 10 years, France was just tired of that. So what Napoleon was saying was, this is not what I want to do. I'm going to continue to do war and to wage war against our enemies, to bring more peace, and peace that would be beneficial for France. And Talleyrand followed him. Roederer also did. Sieyès, the three key people who, within and outside of the French political system, made a way or prepared the conditions of what will become the Brumaire coup d'etat. We know that this went very well on the 17th and the 18th, but on the 19th, Napoleon lost control of what was going on for a while when the Assembly of the 500 refused to give him the powers that he was asking for. And they actually wanted to make him outlaw, but at the time, Lucien, who was in charge, managed to reverse the situation, and he called the army for help. He knew exactly, this is when Murat, one of the army generals whom Napoleon always had with him when he walked in, and he said, this is dissolved, this assembly is dissolved, and this is not speaking. And then he said, put everyone outside, take everyone outside. This is how the directory came to an end and a new regime was started. There was a surprising witness, and that's Louis Bonaparte, one of the younger brothers, who followed Napoleon closely during all these years, and he was traumatized by what he had seen on the battlefield, and that day had another trauma, political trauma, because he believed that the institutions would stand. He did not think or did not believe that his brother would get away with what he wanted to see happening, especially when he saw the people being opposed. And what surprised him was the way that things changed so quickly, so radically, and the speed at which it all collapsed. And therefore, he was afraid. He was afraid of having to go through a similar fate with the possibility of being assassinated, of being murdered, etc. So Louis carried this fear and this trauma for many years, especially when he became King of Holland. And he carried this kind of spirit of mistrust toward the Bonaparte clan. He said, this is the way we came in, but we could be going out in that way. So things had to be clearly reaffirmed by Napoleon in the following years, especially with this famous question, which was his, what place should I give to my family within this new system, which I have just implemented in the new regime, which I have just developed? So the question, to this question, Napoleon answered in an ambivalent way, as his habit. When he was writing the Constitution, he said that the Constitution has to be brief, and when he was going to use a second adjective, someone else said, and clear. He said, no, it has to be obscure, actually, to keep a kind of a control over the situation, to be able also to answer questions that may be brought up by the emergency situation, so that this could not be done otherwise. So same thing happened with the family. He was never clear with his family. He was not clear about the role that he wanted to give to them. He appointed Lucien as a home minister, and then a few years later he took that away from him. He appointed Joseph as a diplomat, but did not make him a minister as such, even though he has a lot of power, especially as part of the Mortefontaine agreement or convention and other main events. And all the other brothers and sisters, we don't quite know what to do with them. The girls should get married. Elisa managed to marry the man she loved, which was not the case for the other two sisters. First, they tried to make Pauline marry General Leclerc. She didn't want that. Pauline, okay, now Murat did what he had to do on the day of the 19th of Brumaire to convince them that he really had saved them, so he was asking for a reward. So he married Caroline, and Jérôme is a free spirit for about 10 years. He is partying everywhere, he's breaking glasses and bringing shame to his brother. He has a lot of debts as well. So it's a complicated family to handle, which really annoys Napoleon a lot. Also because the older ones have some aspirations or pretensions, and they have great ambitions as to their role and what they want to do for France. So that's why, in some way, he's trying to find ways to move them away from the political landscape. He appoints Lucien in Spain and in Italy for the other brother until when France became imperial, he was free. He had free hands in order to send his brothers and sisters pretty much everywhere in Europe to reign over satellite states, as long as they listened to the instructions of the ambassadors. This is how Joseph became King of Naples and King of Spain, a position which he did not want at first. Bonaparte, and that's should be noted, and that's ironical and paradoxical, they remained Republicans really deep down, except for Louis, who was always very different and very special, and called himself the royalist of the family just to annoy his older brother. But as you can see, the Bonaparte family remain a topic of questions regarding their role and the role they all played in the history, and the way that they were always asking for more and more, which really led Napoleon, for example, to question the various peace treaties that had been signed by his brother, mainly against England and against the advice of Joseph and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. and someone else who was also very connected to Joseph, who had a lot in common with him. Mainly the behavior or the attitude to adopt with England, which according to them was not a warrior behavior. Or they had different viewpoints, strategic viewpoints, which was a source of tension between France and England. Now I will be coming to the end of this presentation, which was to help us understand the various personalities of the Bonaparte family. It's a very complex history, as you have understood, and I can only encourage you to consult various works and research studies. We come out of some of the cliches that we had for a long time regarding the Bonaparte family. We thought they were a real weight on Napoleon's, but really all their involvement actually helped to his power and to help to develop the political system as we know in France today. And they helped to give a vision from the philosophers in order to consolidate the heritage of the revolution, like title deeds, abolition of feudalism, and also to consolidate a peaceful society around some main civil and military work, like the civil code and the concordat, which put an end to a religious battle. This concordat was negotiated together with Napoleon, but also with Fesch, who had become a cardinal, Joseph and Lucien also. We often forget the role that the four of them played regarding the policy by the Pope, and also all the military works, which were a consolidation of the borders. This was something that was started since 1793, and the preeminence of the role of France within the concert of nations. This is something that ended in 1814 and tried to come back in 1815. But even today, one has to consider that this history has to be looked at under different angles, especially under the international angle, because the Bonaparte, because of their story, because of their background, belong more to just France, but also are connected to the history of the USA, the history of Germany, the history of Italy. I could not mention all the countries that have been impacted by their history. And this is a source of discussions and debates among historians today. Thank you for your attention. I think we have a bit of time left. If there are any questions, okay, you go ahead. We don't have the mic. We don't hear. Okay, I think the question was, did Napoleon... okay, yes, thank you. Did Napoleon appreciate art and culture? I would say yes, even though there was not a minister of culture as such at the time, but he was really the heir of a mindset and something that was much older, much longer than going way back before the revolution. That is the idea of having an all-powerful state as being the protector of arts and culture. And he did something that is often forgotten. On December 25, 1988, he was elected as a member of the Institute. He wanted to show that he was not just a warrior and a fighter, unlike some of these competitors, generals, etc. He wanted to show that not only he had the expertise and he had the military expertise, but he was also a friend of the wise men or the people who had knowledge. So this military expedition, which was a great failure, yet this is what brought, this is the Egyptian adventure, and he brought back the Egyptian culture. So with these two events, we can say that Napoleon did a lot for art and culture, and also, as I was saying in my introduction, and there's a spirit of the light, esprit des lumières, that he was very fond of his brothers. And Joseph, for example, had a very cultural policy in Naples. He got hold of the monastery libraries, and we have a similar mindset in other countries where some of the Bonaparte members are involved, especially in the north of Italy, in the north of Europe, in Holland. They always wanted to not only keep fighting, but they also wanted to be defenders. What they were saying is that France is a country that is attacked by the enemies, and they fight back with weapons, but also through arts, through language. I'm going to have to make some publicity for my next book. I'm working on the various capital cities that were under siege by Napoleon, and recently I came across an extraordinary letter written by Daru, the state counselor or advisor. And we could have imagined that the French had other things to do. That was before the Austerlitz battle. And Daru wrote very precisely to his counterpart, the Austrian counterpart, and he said, make a list of all the artists, people of science, intellectuals who would need some help to survive during the occupation. I've never heard of an occupation army who was so concerned by the well-being of artists and intellectuals and scientists. So, in some way, this helps us to find a balance between the acts of brutality that Napoleon was accused of, and then also to remember that he was someone who was a heir of the century of the light, to give hope to humanity and to pull things upwards. Was he bipolar? I do not have any psychological report. I don't think it was. I think today he would probably be considered as an HPI, high intellectual potential, which is a new trendy word to qualify difficult children or painful children. But he did not show any particular predisposition when he was a child, just like many geniuses. For example, he tried to write some novels when he was 18, 20, but they were not great pieces of art. So the spirit of Napoleon really emerged later in the 1793, 94. He was really good when he was under pressure, when he came to what was possible to do, came to the end rather. So he had an amazing charisma. It was rather dull, but suddenly he was able to bring along thousands of people with him. So he had this capacity to play with this image. So in some way, that's probably what remains a mystery when we talk about Napoleon. I wouldn't say that he was bipolar. These are difficult diagnoses to put, because he died 200 years ago now, but I don't think we could say he was. It's very difficult to say that he was, or even to label him with other conditions. like any good head of state who understood what to do in order to be respected. He claimed that he was only sleeping a few hours, that he had the light on in his bedroom, and like Stalin was doing, he left the light on, and people were saying the emperor is working. He was actually he just had the light on, so he did not like to sleep in. He was often up around 5 o'clock in the morning. He would start working, and he was able to work very hard and for long hours. When he got to power, not many people were judging him or were hoping or think that he would be a good governor. But with time, they realized that he was actually someone who worked hard, who worked well, who knew how to work with right people. I'm talking about 1804 and so on. And later on, he became more and more isolated, which is the case of some heads of state. I'm not going to give you names, of course, but we saw this kind of phenomena elsewhere. Joubert said something very right about Napoleon. He said Bonaparte is someone who got somewhere. I think this was very right.
Autre question, une dernière? Oui, monsieur le maire.
This comes back to what I was saying just now, this isolation syndrome and this illusion of power. If that happens, we don't make the right decisions, and the Russian campaign was a bad decision. Nothing justified. Rushing off, even with the biggest army ever raised in the history of Europe. On this subject, Charles Lavielle has written a book called The 15th of August 1591, which describes a day during which Napoleon makes this decision to attack Russia. He went and caused a problem on his own festival, because the 15th of August is the festival of Saint Napoleon. He decided that as well. So he calls everybody to come and to see him at the Tuileries, all the diplomatic corps, and for an hour and a quarter, he has an argument in the Russian embassy just to show that the relationships between the two countries are broken down. And this argument took place during this period when Charles Lavielle shows that it's the time of an empire, where there are structural difficulties, very big ones, and economic problems also. And Napoleon thinks that this war will put things back together and create a new cohesiveness. But the people around him are tired, and the marshals are not so effective. They're thinking more about their retirement, about their mistresses, and it's just one more war that was just one war too many. Whereas the younger soldiers coming up are not yet experienced enough to take this on. And so he thought, as like some people today, he thought that it would be a war that was over in a few weeks, and he wasn't ready for the Russian winter to set in. So there we go. Thank you very much for listening. We're now going to have a short interlude with a speech from a local artist who's going to give us quotes from Gérard de Narvel, as David put it so well. He's also a local artist. Is
James Coburn was my
James
grandfather,
Coburn, c'était mon grand-père.
and
James
but
Coburn.
Ben Stiller and
Ben Stiller,
Jim Carrey
et Jim Carrey.
are my cousins,
C'est mes cousins, c'est ce qu'on m'a dit.
because I have a
Parce que,
bipolar disorder too.
parce que moi aussi, je suis bipolaire, voilà.
But I'm not afraid of
Mais
saying it,
j'ai pas peur de le dire,
because
parce que
I have to do it.
parce qu'il faut que je le fasse.
Then a little excerpt
Dans
of
un
the
court
short
extrait
story Sylvie from
d'une
Gérard de Nerval,
petite histoire de Gérard
who was
de Nerval,
who finally committed suicide
qui
because of
finalement s'est suicidé
a disorder. We don't
parce
know
que
which one.
un trouble, on ne sait pas exactement lequel.
Then Sylvie is about
Sylvie, c'est le
is
le
around.
sujet.
There is Mortefontaine all around Sylvie.
Donc il y a Sylvie
But
à Mortefontaine, elle est entourée par
the name,
Mortefontaine.
the word
Mais
Mortefontaine
le mot Mortefontaine
doesn't appear once in
n'apparaît même une
the
seule
short
fois
story.
dans cette courte histoire.
Hermenonville. Je n'avais nulle envie de dormir.
I really didn't want to sleep. I went to Montagny to see my uncle's house. I gradually got sadder and sadder as I saw Joan and the green winds. Everything seemed to be the same as before, but I needed to go to the farmer to get the key to open the door. Once I'd opened the shutters, I saw tenderly the old furniture in the same state as before that we used to stroke sometimes, and the big walnut wardrobe, and two Flemish pictures from an ancient painter who was our ancestor, two big engravings by Boucher, and the whole series of framed Émile and new Eloise engravings. On the table, a stuffed dog that I had known when he was alive, who used to run with me in the woods, because he belonged to a lost race of dogs. As for the parrot, the farmer said, he's still alive. I took him away to my house. The garden had wild vegetables, wild plants, in it. I could recognize in a corner there was a children's garden that I had drawn up in the past. And I entered trembling into the office, and I could still see the little books that had been chosen on the bookshelf by old friends that were no longer, and a few antique vases from the garden, Roman medals, things that we've dug up in the garden, local collections, which made people happy. Now, let's go and see the parrot, the farmer said. The parrot wanted its food and looked at me with its round eye, with its wrinkled skin, made me think about the way an old person will look at you with his experience. Lots of ideas came back to me about this place I'd really loved, and I really felt I'd like to see Sylvie, the only one who was left and young. That was my last attachment to this country. I started back to walk to Oise again in the middle of the day, and everyone was asleep. Everyone was tired out because of the party. And I decided to distract myself by walking towards Emelinville, which is about a mile away, going through the forest. It was a fine summer day, and first of all I really felt happy on this cool path through the park. The big uniform green cokes with the silver birches in their trembling leaves. And the birds weren't singing anymore. And I could just hear the sound of a woodpecker the woodpecker against the trees, building to make a hole for his nest. I thought I was going to get lost looking at different, because the signposts were worn away. I couldn't see where they were taking me. So I left behind me this desert on the left, and I came up to the roundabout, which still existed. I could still see the old people's bench. Ville. In fact, she's saying the same thing as
of its yellow front and green shutters. Everything looked as before, but I was obliged to go to the farmers to obtain the key. The shutters once open, I surveyed with emotion the old furniture, polished from time to time, to preserve its luster, the tall cupboard of walnut, two Flemish paintings said to be the work of an ancient artist, our ancestor, some large prints after Boucher, and a whole series of framed engravings representing scenes from Émile and the New Héloïse by Moreau. On the table was the dog, now stuffed and mounted, that I remembered alive as the companion of my forest rambles, perhaps the last Carlin, for it had belonged to that breed now extinct. As for the parrot, said the farmer, he is still alive, and I took him home with me. The garden offered a magnificent picture of the growth of wild vegetation, and there, in a corner, was the plot I had tended as a child. A shudder came over me as I entered the study, which still contained a little library of choice books, familiar friends of him who was no more, and where upon his desk lay antique relics, vases, and Roman medals found in the garden. A local collection, the source of much pleasure to him. Let us go to see the parrot, I said to the farmer. The parrot clamored for his breakfast, as in his best days, and gave me a knowing look from his round eye peering out from the wrinkled skin, like the wise glances of the old. Full of sad thoughts awakened by my return to this cherished spot, I felt that I must again see Sylvie, the only living tie which bound me to that region, and once more I took the road to Loisy. It was the middle of the day, and I found them all asleep, worn out by the neigh of merrymaking. It occurred to me that it might divert my thoughts to stroll to Ermenonville, a league distant by the forest road. It was fine summer weather, and on setting out, I was delighted by the freshness and verdure on the path, which seemed like an avenue of a park. The green branches of the great oaks were relieved by the white trunks and rustling leaves of the birches. The birds were silent, and I heard no sound but the woodpecker tapping the trees to find a hollow for her nest. At one time, I was in danger of losing my way, the characters being wholly effaced on the guideposts which served to distinguish the roads. Passing the desert on the left, I came to the dancing ring, where I found the benches of the old men still in place.
I'm now going to ask Peter Tucci to take the floor. He's the initiator of this day's event. Peter.
Bonsoir. Je m'appelle Peter Tucci.
Hello, I speak. Okay.
My French is unfortunately rusty, so I apologize. I've been collecting all things related to Joseph Bonaparte for over 25
Est-ce que vous saviez
This
que le
little
frère
article
Napoléon
has
vivait
led me
à
here
en
today.
Philadelphie? C'est cet article qui
I'm
m'a vraiment
extremely
conduit
honored
jusqu'ici. Je suis
to
très
play a role in
honorée
the signing
de pouvoir jouer
today
ce
of
rôle
the sister
aujourd'hui
city relationship
dans cette,
between
dans ce
Mortefontaine,
jumelage
France
entre
and Bordentown, New
Mortefontaine
Jersey,
et
here in
notre
this
ville de
historic
Jersey,
chateau.
ici à
As most of
Mortefontaine.
you know,
Comme vous le
Joseph
savez,
Bonaparte purchased this
Joseph
beautiful
Bonaparte
chateau in
a
1798.
acheté
This was the site where the Treaty of Mortefontaine was signed on September 30th, 1800, which ended the so-called quasi-war between France and the United States. And because of that treaty, France is the only ally, major ally of the United States that the U.S. has never been at war with. So it's a very historic treaty. Joseph Bonaparte not only helped to negotiate this landmark treaty, but he was also one of the signers of the treaty and hosted the signing ceremony exactly where we are today. Joseph lived here until 1815, at which time he decided to relocate to the United States. He lived in the United States until 1839. Most of the time in the United States was spent at his expansive estate known as Point Breeze, located in Bordentown, New Jersey, which is midway between New York City and Philadelphia, which at the time were the two largest cities in the United States. Joseph tried to replicate the exquisite gardens and chateau here at Mortefontaine in his new home in Bordentown, New Jersey, and he largely succeeded. He had the largest library in the United States with over 8,000 volumes, and this was at a time when the Library of Congress in Washington had only 6,000 volumes. He had the largest art collection in the United States, including the original David painting of Napoleon crossing the Alps, which is now at Malmaison. He also created the first extensive picturesque landscape in the United States. His estate ultimately included over 1,800 acres. In fact, Point Breeze became the very epicenter of Franco-American relations in the United States during the 20 years that Joseph Bonaparte resided there. For example, the Marquis de Lafayette visited Point Breeze on 2 separate occasions, as did the future Napoleon III. Stephen Girard, who was from Bordeaux, France, and was the first millionaire in the history of the United States, was also a frequent visitor to Point Breeze. Important and powerful American politicians such as Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and John Quincy Adams all visited Joseph Bonaparte at Point Breeze. In 2020, the state of New Jersey, the city of Bordentown, and other land preservationists worked together to preserve the remaining 60 acres of the former Point Breeze estate. In order to celebrate this important achievement, the Bordentown Historical Society opened an exhibit on May 1st, 2022. This world-class exhibit highlights the impact that Joseph Bonaparte had on the culture, art, horticulture, and landscape design in the United States. In working on the exhibit with Dr. Steve Letterman, who's here this evening, Bonnie Goldman, Doug Kiofsky, and many others, it occurred to me how similar Joseph's 2 residences were to each other. Consequently, I thought, why not create a sister city relationship between these 2 historic locations, which are so closely connected by Napoleon's oldest brother. I firmly believe that linking Mortefontaine and Bordentown in a sister city relationship will result in a symbiotic relationship comprised of cultural, educational, and business exchanges. I know, for example, that school administrators in both Mortefontaine and Bordentown are already excited about the possibility of future exchanges of students. And I know that the Bordentown Historical Society is very eager to welcome Jacques and others from Mortefontaine in a visit to Bordentown. I would like to personally thank Jacques and Jen, the mayors of these 2 wonderful cities, who each supported and made this sister city concept a reality. I think they deserve a round of applause. Finally, I would like to acknowledge and thank Simon, our host this evening, for allowing us to use the chateau as a site for today's expression of the continuing strong bonds between France and the United States. Merci beaucoup.
I'm now going to give the floor to Monsieur Dominique Bernard, who is the director of the Saint-Dominique Institute. It's one of our main areas of work in the exchange between the two towns. Madame le maire of Bordentown and Mrs. the mayor of Mortefontaine, elected representatives and all other representatives, to be associated with this ceremony of twinning and commemoration is both an honor and a joy for the Saint-Dominique Institute, which I represent this evening with our Dominican sisters, with Emmanuel Claire, the college head, and Caroline Norris, English teacher and pilot of our international schemes. This place is dear to our hearts because it is here where our establishment was founded in 1947, and we've always been careful to share with our pupils the most important and famous parts of the history of the domain of Mortefontaine, particularly the remembering of the commercial treaty between France and the States on the 3rd of October in 1800. And our links with the United States are even stronger, with the building of the priory in 1951 was partly financed by families from American sisters. 2 sequoia trees symbolize this precious contribution. More than 1,500 people, students attend this institute with 13 hectares, which is in 13 hectares of the Mortefontaine Park. More than 1,500 students motivated to greet people from other countries and to weave links of friendships beyond our national boundaries. I would like to say, dear Madame Scorchino, that the young people from Bordentown and the Saint-Dominique Institute should undertake an exchange program in the near future and increase the experience of fraternal dialogue between the two cultures. Thank you very much. I must say that after so much knowledge and teaching and information, it's a bit difficult to follow. But I have got some courage to do it, and so I think we have some people from elected representatives from the Parliament, the mayors and other elected representatives, and the representatives from the United States Embassy, and dear American friends, dear friends from Mortefontaine, who love heritage and history. Welcome to Mortefontaine, into this wonderful castle. First of all, I'd like to thank all the people who have been involved in this project today, because we got the go for it 6 weeks ago, and in 6 weeks we've managed to set up this ceremony and to enroll a lot of people in it. You should know that there's a live going out towards the States, a live transmission, because the citizens of Bordentown are watching this ceremony, and a live broadcast which is translated at the moment. I'd like to thank all the town hall staff, because our secretaries found it quite difficult, and I'm a witness to it. But also Simon Kiskowski, who enabled us to have access to this castle, and of course Peter Tucci. Peter Tucci sent me an email 2 years ago, as soon as I was elected, and I remember it. I said, well, who is this person? Is he from another planet? As I wasn't really a political person at the time. And then for 2 years, you know what's happened here. All the projects have been set aside for the time being. And then, as soon as the aeroplanes take to the air, Peter comes back to me and says, Jen is coming. saying, Jen will be coming in 2 months. What are we going to do? Well, we had to do something. I have to admit that 2 or 3 days ago, I looked at the invitation for Simon Kiskowski to visit the castle. I accepted it, and every time I come here, I just feel very emotional because I know a lot of things have happened here in history. It's difficult for us today to imagine it because Mortefontaine is really quite an ordinary small village, but when you come into the castle, you say, wow, something's happened here. And the same thing happens when you go into the Saint Dominique Institute and you see this incredible park, and you say there's a life here. Recently, a friend from arts and history, and I think she'll recognize who she is, she's in this room, said this castle really was had a bit of bad luck. It's been sold, pillaged, amputated, deformed, transformed, like all the history of France the last 250 years when you look over it, when you look back over it very quickly. You say, well, this castle has had exactly the same history as past history as France. Host us today. I'm not even going to mention history because so much has already been said. But I would like to speak more about the symbolic aspect of this day. And the symbolic part of this day, the symbol is sharing between two peoples, the two nations that have always been friends. Sometimes things have hotted up, but we've remained friends. And it's an important time. And I'd like to turn towards my American counterpart to say signing this document is important, both for politics in general, but also because something has to be done. Something concrete has to be done. Today in Europe, we can see that the issue of exchange between peoples is really being called into question. And who could have imagined this a few months ago, that there could be an invasion and thousands of dead people? And it's not the end yet. And I think that maybe we didn't have enough exchange with Russia. Maybe we could regret it today, because if we had had more exchange with Russia, maybe this wouldn't have happened. And so today it's important that we stand firm on this line. We must send our young people to America and receive your young people here, and we will find families to host them. The castle is also a reflection of Joseph Bonaparte, and as Peter said, it's like a communion between, he's the part that links us together. He left here to come to you. I'd like to have Thierry Lance with us today, but 2 days ago he said he couldn't come. And I hope that he will recover very quickly. Maybe he's listening to us at the moment. This is my conclusion. I think that our youth really needs this exchange and to communicate. French is a difficult language. We know that, all of us, we know this, but it's such a beautiful language. Thank you. Jennifer, would you like to come to take the floor now, please?
Merci beaucoup. Bonsoir, je m'appelle.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Ciotino. I'm the mayor of Bordentown, and I'm sorry, like,
my French so I will be switching to English tonight. I want to thank everyone for the incredible welcome we've received. I can't tell you how excited we were when we drove into town earlier and saw Bordentown on the sign outside with Mortefontaine. It was extremely exciting. This is an absolute stunning setting to be here to mark this historic occasion, and we're so thrilled that we could be here. None of this would have been possible without the help of a number of people that have already been mentioned. Most importantly, Mayor Jacques Fabre. Thank you for all your time, your energy, and most importantly, the graciousness of both you and your wife. We certainly appreciate that. I'd also like to thank Simon Kiskowski for generously opening his home to us. It's an absolute marvel, and we're so honored to be here. I also want to thank St. Dominique Institute for its support. Like Mayor Fabre just said, connecting our students will be so important, and I'm really looking forward to connecting him with our school officials as well. And of course, the Bordentown Historical Society for setting the wheels in motion and making all of this possible. Earlier this year, when Peter Tucci had mentioned the possibility of a sister city relationship, my immediate response was absolutely. How can we do this? Because I know how important history is to the people of Bordentown. It's the lifeblood of our city. It fuels so much of what we do all year long. It attracts visitors from near and far, as I'm sure it does here, and it makes our little town special. Much of that has been driven by our historical society, which has been doing tremendous work in recent years, and that's thanks to three people in this room, Director Peter Tucci, and our co-presidents Bonnie Goldman and Steve Lederman, who are also here. The relationship we're forging here tonight will give us the opportunity to highlight our shared histories, and for Bordentown in particular, it will allow us to add more depth and color to a story that is still relatively young when you compare it to the French story here. The founding of our town dates back to 1682, which in the United States is considered quite historic because it predates the founding of our nation by 100 years. In fact, many key figures in the American Revolution called Bordentown home at one time. You may be familiar with Thomas Paine, who was the author of Common Sense, which helped actually shape a lot of hearts and minds around our revolution. Francis Hopkinson, who was also one of the signers of our Declaration of Independence, called Bordentown home. So we have many key figures, but by comparison, when we were walking Senlis last night with Mayor Jacques, we saw some Roman ruins and structures that dated to, I believe, 111 AD. So we're relatively young compared to Mortefontaine. So by twinning our sister cities, we have the opportunity to learn more about our historical ancestors and the legacy that has survived centuries, and it's crossed oceans, and it's still alive in Bordentown today. In fact, I would say that Joseph Bonaparte's legacy is more alive than ever, thanks to the city's recent acquisition and preservation of his estate. As it was mentioned earlier, there was threats of development when it was going up for sale. It could have possibly been a housing development, warehousing, many horrible things we don't want to think about, but the city stepped up, and I want to take this moment to thank my fellow commissioner and our former mayor, Jim Lynch, who together, along with the DNR Greenway, which Peter is a part of, and the state of New Jersey, they recognized the importance, the historical significance of Point Breeze, and came together to seize the opportunity when it was about to go up for sale. It seems so much of what is going on in our city these days touches on our French connections. As Peter mentioned, the Historical Society has an ongoing exhibit right now that has many personal artifacts that he has contributed himself, and the Historical Society has collected from others that belong to Joseph. In fact, we hosted the French ambassador, Philippe Etienne, 2 weeks ago, was that? And he had the chance to tour that as well and to come out and see Point Breeze. We also have a brand new theater in town at the moment, which is running its first production, and it's a play called God of Carnage, which is by French playwright, forgive me if I do not pronounce her name properly, Yasmina Reza, who I know lives in Paris. And we're also currently engaged in a fight right now to preserve a historic bridge that stands where it is today because of Joseph Bonaparte. because the railroad originally wanted to put this bridge through his estate, which would have completely ruined the gorgeous view he had, and he fought the federal government and won, and the railroad now goes directly through our town. But there's so many connections going on right now. So I hope many of you will have the opportunity to visit Point Breeze at some point in the near future, because the views are breathtaking. I was going to a meeting out there a few weeks ago, and I just stopped for a second and paused. The sun was setting on the early fall foliage, and it took my breath away, and I realized what Joseph probably saw in it years ago when he first came there. It's much like what we saw when we first came here this evening. It's stunning, and there are so many similarities with his estate in Bordentown to this one as well. During Ambassador Etienne's visit, he noted that this is proof that the French-American connection runs strong, and I couldn't agree more. It's a connection bound by history, and I'd like to believe a genuine affection. When Joseph's mansion was originally destroyed by fire in 1820, many of his Bordentown neighbors rushed in to try and save his priceless possessions. I think he had the crown jewels and many famous paintings at the time. And he later wrote a letter thanking them and noted, "This event has proved to me how much the inhabitants of Bordentown appreciate the interest I have always felt for them, and shows that men in general are good." 200 years later, the sentiment still holds true. I'd like to think that Mortefontaine, like Bordentown, is a little slice of history that's gotten it right. The people are genuinely good, genuinely compassionate, and we're really looking forward to forging a lifelong relationship with you, especially for future generations. So I want to thank everybody very much for this opportunity.
Est-ce que le sénateur...
Do we have Senator Paco here in the room with us? Thank you. If you can move forward. Sorry, I could not see you. My apologies. You have the floor. I know you are a passionate historian, passionate about heritage. You are the perfect person for the moment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, dear Jacques. I'm not an historian. I just have a degree in history and historian searches. I do not have time, unfortunately, not anymore. And I'm very happy to be here today with you in this beautiful and amazing mythical place, actually, for our history. But also because I'm the vice president of the group of friends of between France and America. I'm also a member of the group France-Russia, which is dormant at the moment, but the French-American friendship group, and I think the vice consul is here. Do we have the vice consul here from the embassy? Yes, hello, you are welcome. You will take the floor in a few minutes. Thank you for coming. On Tuesday, I had the privilege of having dinner with Mrs. the Ambassador, and we talked, of course, of the friendship between America and France. We have differences, we have different opinions, and we have different views with the USA, but let us not forget that our Americans are our oldest allies, and they have not forgotten that either. And Mortefontaine, in our friendship, in our French-American friendship, has a special place, plays a special role. And of course, because of Joseph Bonaparte, among other things, Mortefontaine, with this peculiar poetic name, romantic name actually, with these old stones filled with salt in this beautiful green landscape. Mortefontaine is really a mythical place, and I'm weighing my words because this is where on the map of history, where two of the most powerful, magical, and the people, the Bonaparte Galaxy and the banner of the American Hope, these two met here. Mortefontaine, indeed, is a place, a very special place, which was an oasis of the consulate. I don't know if this is the right word or right expression, but this consulate, which was so special, which was here in this place, where things were negotiated, where diplomacy, where friendship, where love and peace were really shining here. Mortefontaine, a place where Joseph Bonaparte and Julie Clary, we should not forget her, offered to the family, to the Bonaparte family, a place, a shelter, a golden shelter, which symbolized their social ascension, their social success, extraordinary success, actually. You used the word meteorite. I would call this a shooting star, but in this amazing path or trajectory, which was made up of glorious horizons, Austerlitz and others, but also Jacques Fabre mentioned Russia. There are also some more painful horizons like Trafalgar, Spain, maybe the first main mistake, Russia, Waterloo, and a few happy moments like Mortefontaine, which was one of them. Like the great majority of French people, I admire Bonaparte. I say Bonaparte indeed. There's Napoleon and there's Bonaparte. I deeply admire Bonaparte, this small caporal who became a giant, this military giant, genius, this builder, conqueror and builder. Some have built cathedrals over several centuries. In a few months or in a few years, he was able to lay down the foundations of modern France. But like many French people, also deeply admire and deeply love the United States of America, this French country friend, which we talk about the American dream. We don't talk about the Russian dream. We talk about the American dream, the new world in which the Kingdom of France at the time planted its flag and left a lot of traces from New Orleans to St. Louis, from Louisiana, sold by Napoleon Bonaparte, from Louisiana to Maine. But if I love Americans, it's also because I know that what we owe to them. I know what France owes to the Americans. Let us never forget that in 1917, 1944, many boys came over here and died on our soil for our freedom. When their own territory was not under attack, they came and died here. And some were saying, and you have many beautiful photos, and some were saying, Lafayette, here we are, here we come. They never forgot that in the 17th century there was Yorktown and there was Lafayette. A great people always remembers things, always has memory. A great people always has gratitude, always is thankful. So let us never forget what we owe to the America.
We'll never forget General Pershing, Eisenhower, and all the boys fallen in the trenches or on the beaches of Normandy. We'll never forget that our freedom came from your sacrifice, the sacrifice of your boys. So, l'amitié qui nous lie.
Our friendship relies on the blood, or lies rather on the blood of all these boys, all the soldiers, which became like marble. The blood became like marble, which is the most beautiful foundation. Beyond this beautiful story of our twinning agreement, beyond that, there is a simple truth that I want to mention. Without Napoleon, but also without the United States of America, France would not be what it is. Maybe that's a morale of this day. Without Napoleon, without the United States of America, France would not be what it is today. Thank you.
Now we're going to give the floor to the representative of the United States Embassy. He will have the last word, and then I'll take you to the buffet, but it won't be as sumptuous as Joseph's feast in this castle, but it will be a very nice event.
Monsieur le maire, Jacques Frère.
Maire Jacques.
Dear friends, chers amis, en tant que vice-consul des États-Unis à Paris, je suis très honoré d'être ici.
As Vice Consul of the United States of America in Paris, I'm very honored to be here in Mortefontaine for this first visit, for the first time that our friends from Bordentown have been here.
In Paris, it is an honor to be here with you tonight to welcome our friends from Bordentown. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le maire, pour l'invitation et l'organisation de cette belle soirée de célébration de l'amitié franco-américaine. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the invitation and for organizing this great celebration of the Franco-American friendship. Les États-Unis ont plus de 1800 sister cities dans 151 pays à travers le monde. Et la France est le 5e sur la liste des pays où les plus de partenariats ont été tissés. The United States has more than 1,800 sister cities in 151 countries around the world, and France is the 5th country with which the most partnerships have been established. Les États-Unis, en dehors de l'Europe, le premier pays avec lequel la France a développé des villes jumelées. Ce duo franco-américain ont des liens historiques forts et solides, constitue un des réseaux de villes jumelles les plus solides du monde. Similarly, outside of Europe, the United States is the first country with which France has developed twin cities. This long-standing duo with strong historical ties is therefore one of the most stable sister city networks in the world. Aujourd'hui, les partenariats franco-américains vont au-delà des échanges scolaires et culturels. Ils s'attendent des autres domaines tels que l'économie, l'innovation ou encore les enjeux globaux, notamment le changement climatique. Today, Franco-American partnerships go beyond academic and cultural exchanges and extend to other actors in fields such as the economy, innovation, and global issues, particularly climate change. Une véritable dimension stratégique s'est développée au fil du temps. Ces avances permettent d'impulser des projets de coopération, de contribuer au rayonnement des territoires, de gagner en visibilité afin d'être plus attractifs auprès de nouveaux acteurs tels que les entreprises, les touristes ou de nouveaux habitants. A real strategic dimension has developed over time. These advances make it possible to stimulate cooperation projects, to contribute to the influence of territories, and to gain visibility to more attractive and new actors such as companies, tourists, and new habitants. J'ai hâte de vous discuter avec vous, d'apprendre plus sur ce que Mortefontaine et Bordentown souhaitent faire ensemble dans le cadre des jumelles Sister Cities et comment notre ambassade peut vous soutenir ces projets. I look forward to talking with each of you and learning more about how Mortefontaine and Bordentown would like to do within the sister city partnership and how the embassy can support these projects. Merci and thank you.
Fabriqués pour cette occasion, ils ont été donnés par la Société historique de Bordentown. As a souvenir of this ceremony, the city of Mortefontaine will present this medal. It's Bonaparte crossing the Grand Saint-Bernard Pass in the mountains. It's a presentation I made to you today. I'd like to invite you to... Could someone just point the way to the restaurant, the castle restaurant? Thank you.